Clara, fueled by tequila and a sudden spite, pulled Ethan close on the makeshift dance floor. She found Aaron's gaze across the crowded room, his face a mask of stone, and pressed her lips hard against Ethan's. The crash of a glass shattered the music. Aaron, without a word, simply turned his back and walked away, leaving her utterly exposed. The party's silence a cold judgment. The air in Mr. Miller's sprawling living room thickened with the smell of cheap beer and sweat. Willow Creek parties always felt the same, a mix of familiar faces and the quiet hum of unspoken stories. Clara had nursed 3 tequila sodas, each one dissolving a little more of the tight knot in her stomach. Aaron was somewhere near the kitchen, probably talking about engine parts with his cousin. He hadn't looked her way in an hour. The resentment, a slow burn these past few months, flared hotter with each swallow. Across the room, near the stereo, stood Ethan. He was new to town, working construction on the county bridge project. His laugh, deep and easy, carried over the music. He met her gaze, a quick flicker of interest in his eyes, a desperate pull, an almost physical ache, settled in Clara's chest. It was the kind of attention Aaron rarely offered anymore, a spark that had long since died between them. She watched Ethan for a few more minutes, the tequila making the decision feel both reckless and inevitable. She moved through the small clusters of people, past Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning potluck casserole, until she reached him. The music was a little louder here. "Hey there, handsome," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Want to dance?" Ethan's smile was quick, a flash of white teeth. "Sure," he said, nodding towards the makeshift dance floor. He took her hand, his fingers warm, and led her to a cleared space near the sliding glass door. As they swayed to a song she didn't recognize, Clara's eyes scanned the room. She found Aaron, leaning against the kitchen counter. His arms crossed, his face was a mask of stone, the kind he wore when something bothered him but he wouldn't speak about it. The sight of him solidified her purpose. Clara pressed a little closer to Ethan, her body deliberately swaying against his. She wanted Aaron to see it, wanted him to feel the sting of what he'd been missing. Let him finally pay attention. The music swelled, a bass line thumping in her chest. She lifted her chin, the haze of tequila blurring the edges of the room. Without thinking, without a second thought, she turned her face to Ethan's and crashed her lips against his. The kiss was immediate, unexpected, and electric. It was a jolt, a fleeting escape from the suffocating routine of her marriage, the quiet arguments, the distant silences. For a brief moment, nothing else existed but the taste of tequila and newness. Then, a sharp, distinct sound of shattering glass cut through the thumping music. It wasn't just a clatter. It was a violent crack that silenced the room instantly. Clara pulled away from Ethan, her breath catching in her throat. She saw Aaron. He stood frozen, a half-empty beer bottle at his feet, shards of glass glinting on the carpet. His face was twisted. Not just in shock, but in a profound, gut-wrenching betrayal that she felt like a punch. The room, moments before a cacophony of laughter and music, had fallen into a chilling silence. Every single eye in Mr. Miller's living room was on them. On her. Clara tried to speak. "Aaron, But the words died in her throat. The depth of his pain, raw and exposed, was too much to look at, too much to acknowledge. Aaron didn't say a word. He simply turned, his back to her, to Ethan, to everyone. He walked slowly, deliberately, out of the party, the front door closing with a soft thud that echoed in the sudden quiet. A cold dread settled deep in Clara's bones. She stood frozen, the warmth from Ethan's touch already fading, replaced by a terrible chill. This impulsive kiss wasn't just a mistake. It was the fuse of something much larger. Something she knew, with sickening certainty, couldn't be undone. The drive home was an excruciating silence. The truck's engine hummed, a low, constant drone that seemed to vibrate with unspoken anger. Aaron's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, muscles working in his cheek. He stared straight ahead at the dark road, the headlights cutting through the night. Clara huddled against the passenger door, the cold from the window seeping through her dress. Finally the words came out, a whisper barely audible over the truck's rumble. "It didn't mean anything, Aaron. I was just trying to." Aaron snapped, his voice sharp and cold, cutting through the silence like a knife. He didn't even look at her. "To humiliate me? To destroy our marriage? You succeeded on both counts." The gravel crunched under the tires as Aaron pulled the Silverado into their driveway. He cut the engine, the sudden silence heavy, then opened his door. He didn't spare a glance my way. Just got out and walked toward the house, his silhouette stiff against the porch light. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my hands shaking a little, and followed him in. My legs felt rubbery, each step a conscious effort. A cold churn started in my stomach, guilt mixing with a rising dread. The front door closed behind me with a soft click. Aaron stood in the center of the living room, a space that usually felt warm and familiar, but now seemed vast and empty. He turned, slowly, and faced me. His eyes were dark, unreadable. His voice, when it came, was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. "How long has this been going on, Clara?" I took a step back, my breath catching. "No, Aaron, it's not like that. It was just tonight. I swear. He's nobody." The words tumbled out, desperate, unconvincing even to my own ears. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, so you just go around kissing random strangers in front of everyone? Is that supposed to make me feel better? Is that what a good wife does on a Friday night?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, each word a small cut. I felt the last of my bravado drain away. My knees gave out a little, and I sank onto the edge of the couch, burying my face in my hands. The floral pattern of the cushions pressed against my cheeks. "I'm so sorry." I mumbled, the words muffled. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't. Not really. It had been an impulse. A raw, stupid reaction to weeks of feeling invisible. I looked up, tears starting to sting my eyes. "Please, Aaron, can we talk about this? Can we fix this?" The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Aaron stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, out the window, at the dark, quiet street. An unnerving calm settled over him, replacing the anger. It was worse than the shouting would have been. Finally he spoke. His voice was eerily devoid of any emotion, flat and distant, as if discussing the weather. "There's nothing to fix, Clara." He paused, then continued, his eyes finally meeting mine, cold and unforgiving. "You've made your choice." He took a slow breath, his chest barely moving. "Now you'll have to live with the consequences." He turned then, his back to me again, and walked toward the stairs. Each step he took up, the old wooden steps echoed in the silent house, a finality to each creak. I heard the soft click of the spare bedroom door opening, then the sharp, decisive slam that echoed through the entire house, settling deep into the quiet. It was a devastating sound, a punctuation mark at the end of something that had already ended. I sat there on the couch, the cold dread from the party returning, heavier now. I understood, with a sinking heart, that tonight was merely the beginning of my nightmare. The next few weeks blurred into a monotonous cycle of tears and the heavy weight of unspoken words. The house became a tomb. Arguments flared, brief and sharp, over the smallest things, a misplaced remote, the temperature of the coffee, but never over the one thing that mattered. Aaron avoided me with a practiced precision. He was gone before the sun rose, the sound of his truck pulling out of the driveway a daily reminder of his absence. He returned long after I'd gone to bed, the soft creak of the floorboards upstairs the only sign he was home. Our paths rarely crossed. When they did, usually in the kitchen, the air between us was thick, palpable, like an unspoken storm. I tried to bridge the chasm. I left notes on the counter, small apologies, requests to talk. I suggested counseling, even printed out brochures for local therapists. I cooked his favorite meals, the pot roast with mashed potatoes, the chili he loved in the fall. Each attempt was met with the same unyielding coldness, a silent wall I couldn't break through. His eyes would pass over me as if I were a piece of furniture, his replies clipped, devoid of any warmth. The kitchen counter felt cold beneath my forearms. I had been listlessly scrolling through job listings on my laptop. The screen, a dizzying blur of administrative assistant positions and data entry roles. The small firm where I'd worked part-time for the last 5 years had called that morning. My services were no longer needed. A sudden restructuring, they'd said. Budget cuts. I knew better. The firm handled a lot of local business. Aaron's family had deep roots in Willow Creek, and his father knew practically everyone who mattered. There was no concrete proof, no smoking gun, just a cold certainty that settled in my gut. I closed the laptop. It was a Tuesday afternoon, still too early for Aaron to be home from the machine shop. The sudden creak of the front door startled me. I looked up as he walked into the kitchen, his usual work boots scuffing lightly on the linoleum. He didn't meet my eyes, just moved to the sink and rinsed his hands. His face was an unreadable mask, not angry, not sad, just blank. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat, his back to me as he dried his hands on a paper towel. A flicker of hope, foolish and unwelcome, ignited in my chest. Maybe, after weeks of silence and avoidance, he was finally ready to discuss it. Truly discuss it. "Yes, please. I've been wanting to." He held up a hand, a quiet, definitive gesture that cut me off mid-sentence. He turned, leaning against the counter. His arms crossed, his eyes finally met mine, and they were devoid of any warmth. "I'm filing for divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs, leaving me gasping, dizzy. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. "What?" "No, Aaron, please." It was one mistake. Just one stupid, awful mistake. The denial was automatic, desperate. My throat tightened, tears already blurring my vision. "We can work through this," I begged, the words catching. "I know we can. We have too much history, too many years." I could feel the tears streaming down my face now, hot and unstoppable. His voice remained chillingly calm, as if he were discussing a broken appliance rather than our life together. "It's not just about the kiss, Clara." He paused, his gaze drifting around the kitchen, past the chipped coffee mugs, the fading family photos on the fridge. "It's about trust. It's about respect. It's about love." He brought his eyes back to mine, and they were colder than ever. "All the things you threw away that night." I reached for his hand, desperate, wanting to feel something, anything, from him. My fingers brushed his sleeve, but he pulled away instantly, his body stiff, like a board. He wasn't just distant. He was entirely removed. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. "You'll be hearing from him soon." He turned, starting to walk out of the kitchen, towards the front door. "What about our vows?" I called out, my voice cracking, raw. "For better or for worse?" He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. He looked back at me, his eyes still devoid of any warmth, any recognition of the woman he'd married. "This is the worst, Clara," he said, his voice quiet, final. "And I'm choosing to walk away." The door closed behind him then, not with a slam, but with a soft, decisive click that resonated through the house. It was the sound of absolute finality, shattering the last shred of hope I'd clung to. I had foolishly believed the worst was over, that his coldness was the extent of it. But little did I know, standing there alone in my quiet kitchen, my true nightmare had only just begun. The quiet in the house became less about absence and more about isolation. I noticed the shifts gradually, like the changing seasons. First, my calls to Emily, my closest friend from college, stopped being returned. Then, invitations to the monthly book club, a staple in my social calendar, dried up. Even my own family, usually so effusive, started keeping their distance. Conversations with my sister, Sarah, grew stilted, filled with uncomfortable pauses and quick subject changes. They'd ask if I was doing okay, but their eyes held a cautiousness I hadn't seen before. Initially, I attributed it to the natural fallout of a messy divorce, especially one that started with a public spectacle. People didn't like drama, and I was certainly drama now. But a more sinister suspicion began to grow. a cold tendril coiling in my gut. It was too widespread, too consistent. The turning point came at the Willow Creek Family Foods. I was pushing a half-empty cart down the canned goods aisle, trying to remember if we still had enough black beans, when I spotted her. Brenda, my best friend since grade school, practically a sister. She was examining a jar of pickles near the back wall. My heart gave a hopeful leap. This was it. A chance to talk, to explain. "Brenda!" I called out, my voice too loud in the quiet aisle. She looked up, saw me, and her shoulders visibly tensed. Her eyes widened for a split second. Then she swiftly turned, practically jogging down another aisle, trying to disappear behind a display of cereal boxes. My hopeful leap turned into a stab of hurt. This wasn't just avoidance. This was active evasion. Determination hardened my resolve. I pushed my cart faster. "Brenda, wait up!" I called out again, my voice sharper this time. She stopped at the end of the aisle, near the frozen foods. Her shoulders were stiff, rigid. Slowly, she turned to face me. The look on her face was a mixture of pity and something else, something colder, bordering on disgust. "Hey, Clara," she said, her voice strained. "Can't really talk right now. I'm in a hurry." My confusion quickly turned to raw hurt. "Brenda, what's going on? You've been avoiding me for weeks. I've called you, left messages. Did I do something?" I pleaded, my voice quiet now, cracking a little. Brenda sighed, glancing around nervously, as if worried someone might overhear. "Look, I can't be associated with someone like you, Clara." She shifted her weight, fiddling with the strap of her purse. Her eyes hardened then, meeting mine. "Not after what you did." What I did?" I felt a flash of indignation. "You mean the kiss, Mel? That was a stupid mistake. Tequila and a bad moment. You, of all people, would understand how a moment of weakness can just happen." Brenda shook her head, a grin set to her mouth. "It's not just the kiss, Clara." She paused, lowering her voice, but her words still cut through the grocery store hum. "It's everything else. Your affairs, the embezzlement." A sudden chill snaked down my spine, colder than the frozen foods section. My mind reeled. "Affairs? Embezzlement? What are you talking about?" The words felt alien, detached from reality. Brenda snapped, her patience gone. "Don't play dumb, Clara. It's all over town. Aaron told everyone what really happened. Why he left, the multiple affairs, how you were stealing money from his company. It's disgusting, Clara." She stared at me, her judgment clear, unwavering. With that, Brenda turned on her heel and practically ran down the aisle. Her cart clattering, she didn't look back. I stood there, amidst the rows of frozen peas and ice cream, shell-shocked and reeling. The fluorescent lights of the store seemed to dim, the sounds of distant shoppers fading. My phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my thigh. I pulled it out, my fingers numb. An unknown number. The message glowed on the screen, stark and cruel. "How's it feel to be the pariah, you cheating W.E. Aaron sends his regards." The months that followed Brenda's brutal honesty at the grocery store blurred into a nightmarish existence of whispers and pointed fingers. Every outing, every errand, felt like walking a gauntlet. Looks of utter disgust followed me. Silent judgments whispered just out of earshot. The rumors Aaron had meticulously spread, it turned out, were more inventive and damaging than I could have imagined. They took on a life of their own, growing more outrageous with each retelling. Not just a kiss, not just some stolen company funds, but a string of affairs, a gambling addiction, and the utterly vile insinuation about his own brother. I had already lost my job, of course. My few remaining friends, after Brenda, vanished entirely. Even my family, who had always been my unwavering rocks, started to distance themselves. When my mother called, her voice was heavy with a mix of disappointment and disbelief I'd never heard before. "Honey," she'd said during one of our increasingly rare phone calls, her tone soft but firm, "maybe it's time you admitted to what you've done and sought help." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. Mom, what are you talking about? Clara, your father and we can't keep defending you when the evidence seems so overwhelming. She continued, her voice weary, laden with a sorrow that cut me to the bone. People are talking. Aaron has shown us things. The bank statements, the emails. My blood ran cold. Evidence? Mom, there is no evidence. I didn't do any of those things. It's all lies. Can't you see that? My protests, desperate and raw, seemed to fall on deaf ears. Aaron had been thorough in his character assassination, painting a picture of a lying, cheating, thieving sociopath. He was the successful, charming businessman, the wronged party, and I was just the wife who had publicly humiliated him, and, apparently, much worse. People believed him. Why wouldn't they? He always knew how to make himself look good. I desperately tried to fight back, to tell my side of the story, to explain the truth. But it was like screaming into a void. No one wanted to listen to the pariah, the woman everyone already believed was guilty. The final, crushing blow arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A process server, a young man who looked uncomfortable doing his job, handed me a thick envelope bound with a rubber band. Divorce papers. My hands shook uncontrollably as I broke the seal and began to read. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the intent was horrifyingly clear. Aaron wasn't just divorcing me. He was systematically destroying my life. He sought full ownership of their house, the cars, even our joint bank accounts. His lawyers had crafted a narrative that laid out my supposed financial mismanagement and infidelity in painstaking detail, painting me as morally bankrupt and even potentially criminally liable for the alleged embezzlement. Every accusation Brenda had mentioned was now formalized, printed on official documents. I spent the next 2 days calling every lawyer in Willow Creek. My voice grew hoarse, my hope dwindling with each conversation. Each one turned me away. Conflict of interest, they'd say, or more bluntly, "I'm sorry, Miss Miller, but I simply can't take your case." It became chillingly clear that Aaron's pervasive influence extended far beyond our social circle. He hadn't just turned my friends and family against me. He had ensured I was utterly alone, without legal recourse, trapped in his web. As you listen to Clara's story, you might wonder how anyone could fall so far, so fast. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The silence in the house pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I sat on the old floral couch, the same one where Aaron and I had watched countless movies, where we'd planned our future. Now, it just held painful memories. Waves of despair washed over me, cold and relentless. How had one stupid, drunken kiss, one reckless moment of defiance, led to such complete and utter ruin? My entire life, meticulously built over years, had collapsed around me, leaving nothing but wreckage. But then, a stubborn spark, small and fragile, began to glow amidst the desolation. I wouldn't simply vanish. I wouldn't let him win so easily. Not entirely. I started to notice things, small inconsistencies in the pervasive rumors. Some of the details didn't quite fit, tiny threads loose in Aaron's carefully woven tapestry of lies. The embezzlement, for instance, it was so specific. Yet none of my old colleagues had ever mentioned anything beyond my abrupt firing, and the thing with his brother. That one always felt different, more personal, more venomous than the vague affairs. I began cautious inquiries. My first attempt was at the Willow Creek Perk, the local coffee shop. I spotted Martha Jenkins, an older woman who used to babysit Aaron and his brother when they were kids. She had a reputation for holding grudges, and wasn't exactly in Aaron's inner circle. I ordered a black coffee, trying to appear casual, and eventually drifted toward her table. "Rough business, this divorce, isn't it?" Martha said, stirring her tea, her eyes sharp. She gave me a long look, a hint of something unsaid in her gaze. Aaron always was a go-getter. Ambitious, that one. She paused, then added, almost to herself, "Never let anything stand in his way. Not even family." The veiled hint, the quiet resentment in her voice, resonated. Not even family. The phrase echoed in my mind, bringing back Brenda's accusation. The thing with his brother. That detail. It always felt out of place. Why would Aaron specifically invent something so cruel and specific about his own brother, unless it held some kernel of truth, some twisted echo of his past? I started spending my afternoons at the town's small public library, away from the judging eyes of Willow Creek. The library offered a quiet solace, the rustle of turning pages the only sound. I discreetly researched Aaron's company online, sifting through archived news articles and public records. Most of it was bland, corporate boilerplate. Then I found it, an old article, a local paper from nearly a decade ago, detailing a contentious family dispute. It involved Aaron and his estranged brother, a bitter disagreement over a small inherited property, a piece of land that had been earmarked for a business venture. The article didn't provide many details, but it mentioned a falling out, a lawsuit that was ultimately settled out of court, and the brother moving away from Willow Creek not long after. A cold clarity settled over me. Aaron's meticulous plan of destruction, his carefully constructed narrative, might be rooted in his own darker history, and if so, it might have blind spots, weak points I could exploit. The crushing loneliness still persisted, a dull ache in my chest, but the possibility of uncovering the truth and clearing my name gave me a fragile new purpose. I started keeping a meticulous journal, a cheap, spiral-bound notebook I bought at the general store. In it, I documented every rumor I heard, every strained interaction, every small piece of information that challenged Aaron's story. Dates, times, names. I understood that I needed concrete, undeniable proof. Not just whispers. To fight back against a man so calculating, so ruthlessly efficient in his deceit, the weight of being publicly shamed was immense, a constant pressure on my shoulders, but the conviction that the truth existed, somewhere, fueled me. This fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the systemic way power could crush the vulnerable, about a man using his influence to destroy a life. My persistent research finally led me to him, Mark Jorgensen, a name I found buried in an old Willow Creek Gazette article about a small, local contracting dispute. He'd been a foreman at Aaron's company over a decade ago, let go under suspicious circumstances. It took weeks to track him down to a neighboring town, where he worked at a small hardware store. He was gaunt, his eyes holding a wary resentment. We met in a booth at a local diner, the clatter of plates and muffled conversations providing a thin veil of privacy. Mark was fearful, his hands trembling slightly as he held his coffee cup, but the deep-seated grudge he bore against Aaron was stronger. He reluctantly shared information about Aaron's past questionable business practices. Nothing solid enough for a lawsuit now, but enough to paint a picture. He spoke of padded invoices, manipulated contracts, and the quiet disappearance of funds that always seemed to coincide with a scapegoat being fired. I pieced it together. Aaron had orchestrated a minor embezzlement scheme years ago, subtle enough to avoid legal detection, but blatant enough to ruin the life of an innocent party, a quiet, unassuming bookkeeper. He'd never been caught, but Mark knew. He'd been the one to find the discrepancies, the one who'd almost spoken up before Aaron leveraged something from Mark's own past to silence him. The thing with his brother accusation now took on a chilling new meaning. I revisited the old newspaper article, reading between the lines. Their bitter falling out wasn't just over an inherited property. It had been a fraudulent business deal, a shell company Aaron had set up, draining his brother's portion of the inheritance before it could ever reach him. The brother had accused Aaron of betrayal, of theft. But the legal settlement, quiet and fast, had buried the truth. I realized then, with a cold clarity, that Aaron wasn't just framing me for his crimes. He was framing me for fabricated crimes that eerily echoed his own manipulative history. The accusations he'd flung at me, embezzlement, affairs, even the specific mention of his brother, were reflections of his own past misdeeds, weaponized against me. My fading but sharp legal skills, honed during my time at the law firm, returned. I meticulously gathered and organized this hidden evidence in secret. It wasn't airtight. Not yet. But it was enough to raise serious questions. I knew no one in Willow Creek would touch my case, so I found a lesser-known, ethical lawyer in a neighboring county, a woman named Miss Davies. She was quiet but sharp, intrigued by the layers of manipulation I presented. After reviewing my evidence, she agreed to take my case. A tense, arranged meeting took place in a discreet meeting room in the county seat, a neutral territory far from Willow Creek. Clara, Miss Davies, Aaron, and his two slick lawyers sat across a polished table. Aaron was initially confident, composed, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. Miss Davies, with quiet precision, presented our initial findings. She didn't directly accuse Aaron of anything, but she carefully challenged his meticulously crafted narrative. She spoke of discrepancies in previous company audits, patterns of financial irregularities mirroring current accusations, and, most subtly, mentioned past family disputes over inheritance and business ventures. Aaron, for the first time, displayed a fleeting flicker of unease. His composure fractured for a split second, as the specific details of his own past misdeeds were subtly hinted at, veiled in legalistic language. He shifted in his seat. I looked at Aaron across the table, no longer with despair or raw hurt, but with a cold, unwavering resolve. "You didn't just want to hurt me, Aaron," I said, my voice low but clear. "You wanted to bury me with your own sins." "Itself." Aaron's lead lawyer, a man with a heavy gold watch, scoffed. "These are desperate counter-accusations, Miss Miller, lacking any substantial proof. Hearsay and innuendo." However, the seed of doubt had been unmistakably planted, particularly regarding the brother incident, which, while having no legal bearing on our divorce, carried significant social weight, especially in a small town. The meeting concluded without a definitive resolution, but as we walked out, I sensed a palpable shift in the balance of power. I understood that exposing Aaron's hypocrisy, rather than merely clearing my name in court, was my true path to a form of justice. The divorce proceedings, once a quiet legal maneuver, transformed into an even uglier, more protracted public battle. Miss Davies, with methodical precision, formally introduced the new evidence. Not everything Mark Jorgensen had shared was legally admissible, but enough was to cast a long shadow over Aaron's reputation and financial dealings. The minor embezzlement scheme, the details of the fraudulent business deal with his brother all carefully presented, raising questions the court could not ignore. Aaron's carefully cultivated image as the wronged, successful businessman began to visibly crack under the intense public scrutiny. The media buzz, initially confined to the county seat, trickled back into Willow Creek. People talked. They compared the current accusations against Clara to the subtle hints about Aaron's own past. While not fully exonerated, the Willow Creek community's opinion of Clara subtly shifted, softening from outright disgust to a more complex pity as the calculated cruelty of Aaron's revenge and his own hypocrisy came to light. The gossip didn't stop, but its venom lessened, replaced by a new kind of murmuring, this time directed at him. My family, witnessing the unfolding revelations, tentatively reached out. My sister, Sarah, called first, her voice hesitant. Then, a few days later, my mother drove over. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where Aaron had delivered his divorce ultimatum. It was a quiet, painful conversation. I acknowledged my own initial mistake, the stupid, drunken kiss, and the hurt it had caused, but I also laid bare the disproportionate and brutal nature of Aaron's retaliation. His methodical dismantling of my life. My mother listened, her eyes filled with regret for their initial, swift judgment. The court eventually ruled on the divorce. The outcome was significantly less favorable for Aaron than his initial scorched earth strategy had intended. He didn't lose everything, but he certainly didn't win it all. The judge cited questionable business practices and a pattern of disproportionate marital retribution. I didn't recover everything. I lost my reputation, my innocence, the quiet certainty of my life, but I wasn't left destitute. I retained a modest share, enough to begin rebuilding my life independently, away from the shadow he cast. Aaron faced lingering questions from business associates, a damaged reputation that would follow him, and a community now privy to the cracks in his once perfect facade. He still had his company, his money, but the air of untouchable respect he'd once commanded in Willow Creek was gone. I sat alone in the house one last time, the echo of empty rooms amplifying my thoughts. I reflected on the immense personal cost of my impulsive actions. That single desperate moment on the dance floor, it had been a cry for attention, a fleeting escape from a growing emptiness. But Aaron's response had been a cold, calculated act of annihilation. A deliberate choice to destroy rather than to simply separate. I accepted that I must forever live with the consequences of my infidelity. There was no erasing that. Yet, in surviving Aaron's targeted ruin, I found a new, quiet strength, a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The decision to leave Willow Creek was both difficult and necessary. The town held too many ghosts, too many whispers. I needed to move to a new place, a place where I could forge a life free from the suffocating shadows of Aaron's influence and the town's memory. I understood that some things like trust, reputation, and the innocence of a once shared life, once shattered, could never be fully restored. I packed the last box, mostly old books and a few keepsakes, and put it in the back of my small car. The engine turned over on the first try. I drove out of the driveway, past the empty house, and onto the highway, leaving Willow Creek behind. In the rearview mirror, the landscape receded, a panorama of hard-earned lessons and deep-set scars. I looked forward, not to bitterness or continued revenge, but to a quiet, honest rebuilding. I finally grasped the true price of my initial mistake, and Aaron's profound, vindictive betrayal. The silence in the empty house was a stark reminder of everything lost. Clara had paid a heavy price for a moment's recklessness, a kiss born of neglect and defiance. But Aaron's response had been methodical, precise, designed not just to hurt, but to obliterate. He had used her fleeting mistake as a weapon, forging it into a narrative of profound betrayal, leveraging it to destroy her standing, her livelihood, her very identity in Willow Creek. The legal battles had concluded, leaving behind a landscape of emotional wreckage. Clara understood now that forgiveness was not always an option, and some wounds would never truly heal. She had survived, yes, she had gained a measure of justice, but the scars remained deep. Leaving Willow Creek was not an escape, but a necessary step toward a quiet, unadorned future, where she could rebuild without the constant weight of judgment and memory. The road ahead was long, but she drove toward it with a clear, if heavy, understanding of the profound and often brutal cost of human actions, both her own and others.